I am willing to accept Russia's capitulation. The man who spoke these words is getting replaced, and the execution of a genocidal Russian war criminal. This and more in the Situation Report. There has been a new prisoner exchange. 63 Russians were replaced with 116 Ukrainians. The Russian Ministry of Defense said that the personnel was of important category, like sensitive category, which would somewhat indicate maybe intelligence personnel or something like this. And that is supposed to justify the quota of roughly 1 to 2, so 1 Russian soldier for 2 Ukrainian soldiers. We see here Riba, which was quoted a couple of times in the past, who is mentioning this and is complaining about the issue, but later they add supposedly it was only 55 Ukrainians. So according to the newest numbers, suddenly there were more Russians handed over than Ukrainians. There has been a fire in an oil depot inside of an industrial plant within Belgorod. According to some information, we find it here. We have more pictures here. This is a place where parts for the Kerch Bridge are being produced, and the local governor was saying that it was an attack by the Ukrainians. Obviously, as of now, we can't say much about this otherwise. The Ukrainian Defense Minister Oleksiy Reznikov is getting replaced. He on the 26th of February, so 2 days after the initiation of the second phase of this war, he was on the phone with the Belarusian defense minister, who offered a solution for the war by relaying an offer from Shoigu. Shoigu said they would immediately stop with the invasion if Ukraine is capitulating, and Rezhnikov's response in return was, I am willing to accept the Russian capitulation. Rezhnikov is now getting the new Minister for Strategic Industry. He's getting replaced by Kyrylo Budanov, Major General, who was so far, or is still until the exchange is actually done, heading the GUR, so the military intelligence from Ukraine. The corruption inside of the defense ministry will likely have played a role to that, even though Reznikov himself has not been implied in any of the wrongdoing. But it's also kind of a sign that a civilian, as Reznikov is one, I think it's pronounced Reznikov and not Rezhnikov. But as he is a civilian, he's getting replaced by a military, by a general. That kind of speaks also for the seriousness of the situation, that in front, ahead of an expected invasion from the Russian forces, the Ukrainians are replacing their personnel. On the Eastern Front, the Ukrainians are saying that the Russians are saying that they have advanced into Dvorichne and are getting close to Dvorichna. There seems to be some confirmed gains actually at Dvorichne, even though it's unclear yet to what degree the town has been taken. So we can assume there have been minor territory gains in this area here. Other than that, there's little confirmed changes. The majority of the attacks seems to be from the Russian side so far, and the majority of the direction seems to be in the direction of Liman, which would likely be aimed at aiding a potential offensive after a capture of Bakhmut, that some kind of encirclement can be attempted in this direction here. South of the Siversky Donetsk, the Russians have had further successes close to Blahodatne. They have reached the high grounds there. And further south, the Russians are creeping really close to the T0504. According to some numbers, they are close to 1 kilometer to the town. In others, they are still 2.5 kilometers away, but they are definitely really close as of now, and the road itself should be more or less unusable. The main line of communication surely is through Chasiv Yar, but the northern route might still be usable to some degree. In the east of Bakhmut, we have confirmed advances by the Russian itself, so they also gained more territory within Bakhmut. With the situation now, Ukrainian evacuation from the position seems more likely. Around Avdiivka, there's fighting continuing, but not really big ones. So while obviously there are still engagements, there doesn't seem to have been any serious Russian attacks over the last 3 to 4 days. That would indicate that the Russian offensive power, at least by now, is either guarded or more or less spent, as it's mostly concentrating around Bakhmut and Vuhledar, because there's also fighting in Marinka, but the fighting seems to be somewhat limited as well, even though the Russians seem to have gained some ground in there. Around Vuhledar, there is continued fighting, and we now have visual proof that the Russians have by now actually reached the outskirts of Vuhledar, so they have advanced over the last few days, but they are supposedly not having captured it yet. It's not encircled or anything else like this. On the southern front, there's not really much news apart from usual artillery shelling, so we can talk about a summary of the situation on the front line right now. A Ukrainian withdrawal from Bakhmut seems to come closer by the day. It seems to be only a matter of days until the Ukrainians give up the position and withdraw. The defensive lines in front of Sloviansk and Kramatorsk are considered to be really strong, so it's highly unlikely that the Russians can use the momentum and push forward to capture Sloviansk and Kramatorsk. Also, in the area in between, not only are there strong defensive lines, but the geography also is advantageous for the defender, as a lot of ridge lines lie in between that can be used for the defense. Ukraine, in the last weeks, we see that Ukraine is more or less relying mostly, not exclusively, but mostly on territorial defense units, on National Guard and on foreign volunteers to fight for Bakhmut. That's an indication that they try to safeguard their regular armed forces, their regular army, for potential defeats of other Russian attacks or for a potential counterattack. All of this again proves the point that Bakhmut is not considered essential for the Ukrainian side. It has obviously gained a lot of value because of the sunk costs spent by both sides. They have fought so long for that city that now it has become a symbol out of itself, even though there is no real strategic value that would anywhere close to justify the losses being taken by the Russians and likely by the Ukrainians as well. But everything looks in the regards that the Ukrainians don't want to force a defense. So while they keep defending, it's not like they push in reserves to hold it by all means. And at the same time, it seems more and more likely by the day that we might be surprised in the overnight soon that the Ukrainians have given up Bakhmut and have conducted an orderly withdrawal. Resnikov said the Russians are currently losing 500 men at Bakhmut alone, but he didn't mention their own losses, and we can consider them to be significant as well. The advisor to the Ukrainian mayor of Mariupol said that Russian soldiers are talking to civilians, and they are saying that an offensive in the direction of Vuhledar is planned, that also the area south of Bakhmut is going to get attacked, and Zaporizhzhia, both the province as well as the city itself. For that, 10 to 15,000 men were supposedly sent to Mariupol, and 30,000 are already concentrated in the area around Mariupol to assist a further Russian offensive. Whether or not the Russians are actually trying to capture Zaporizhzhia, like the Ukrainians believe, like the Ukrainians say in some statements, seems fairly unlikely. The city is 750,000 big, and anything else but a massive another slugfest house-to-house fighting would be highly surprising. So the supposed deadline that I mentioned in the last situation report of the 31st of March to capture Zaporizhzhia seems extremely unlikely to be realistic. When it comes to partisan activity, at least that's what we would understand, that it's partisan activity. It's this here is it. Igor Mangushev, who is also known as Berek, was shot in Luhansk at a checkpoint. He was shot in the back of his head while being on his knees, so it was basically an execution. Before that, he became famous for demanding, for saying that the Ukrainians should be extinguished, that the Ukrainian civilization, the Ukrainian people should be killed. And he was posing with a skull that supposedly came from a Ukrainian defender of Azovstal. He was now he was now killed. So I would assume it was coming from partisans, because there's not really a reason for the Russians to execute him. At least I don't see one at this very moment. When it comes to the mobilization, there is, in general, when it comes to force generation, we see efforts by the Russian military to consolidate its control over the armed forces. A lot of different units are currently fighting in Ukraine, from volunteers to BARS reservists to Cossack units, Chechens, Wagner, DNR and LNR militias, as well as the regular army. And that's obviously is not helping with cohesion, with cooperation between the units. And what we see since Gerasimov took operational control over the war, that he intensifies attempts to streamline the whole Russian force structure. That is obviously necessary and useful, but we should not expect it to be fairly easy, especially when we consider that a big Russian offensive operation is expected to start within days or weeks. Doing restructuring of units during a massive offensive is obviously not one of the easiest moves, but we should not consider it to be impossible. While it might hinder the Russian combat effectiveness in some degree, it would probably be worth it even doing it during an offensive for the long-term benefits. The Ukrainian General Staff is also saying that the Russians are still obviously trying to create forces, additional forces, and according to the Ukrainian General Staff, the recruitment of prisoners has now started to be extended to women. 50 women have by now been recruited and are currently being trained to be used in the armed forces of Russia to fight against Ukraine. When it comes to international support, we have a Twitter news from the Canadian government that the first Leopard 2A4 has arrived in Poland. It is already sent there to be trained, to be used in training Ukrainian forces, to be used in the near future. And from US government, we hear that there are plans from Iran to establish a drone factory within Russia. So up to 6,000 drones are supposedly going to be built in the near future, then in Russia and locally produced. And I have an interesting news also. Lobaev Arms is a manufacturer for very long-range precision rifles. Another thing where you see how the defense industry in Russia is trying to increase the output and to increase its effect on the war. This company is now saying that they want to start the production, development and production of drones themselves, so from rifle manufacturer to drone manufacturer. And there are news that the Ukrainians are now starting to being trained on the SAMPT Mamba SAM system. It can be used against ballistic missiles, so should Iran deliver its ballistic missiles to Russia, this air defense system could be used against it, and obviously also against Iskander and Tochka-U that the Russians might still be using against Ukrainian targets. And we have another interesting information that's not proof of direct involvement, but Azerbaijani 120mm mortar rounds have appeared on the Ukrainian side and are being used by them. The source for that is unclear. Obviously, there is no proof as of yet that the Azerbaijani government has actively delivered armaments, ammunition to the Ukrainians, but we've seen other nations' armaments popping up there too in times from confiscated arms shipments and other stuff. So basically Western nations are emptying their stockpiles of confiscated weaponry to hand it over to Ukraine. That's it from me for now. What do you think about the exchange of the Ukrainian defense minister? Do you think that is a necessary step, or do you think Reznikov made a decent job so far, so he should have stayed in place? Leave your comment in the comment section. And if you like what I do here, if you like this channel, it is only possible because of the support from viewers like you. So if you would like to support the channel, you can do so by the means in the description. Thank you very much to everyone already having supported. And if you like this video, please hit the thumbs up button, leave a comment for the algorithm, or to comment on something that happened inside of the video. And if you're new here, I would like to invite you to subscribe to the channel, hit the bell icon so you don't miss future videos, and recommend the channel to your friends and acquaintances to help it grow. That's it from me for now. Thank you for watching, and I'll be back.